Hi everybody, my name is Monica. I'm responding to Ben's claim that government surveillance infringes on civil liberties and privacy of the American people. His secondary claims were that the U.S. government conducts surveillance through technology behind the backs of Americans. The NSA violates the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution by illegal spying, and that the NSA indirectly and directly infringes on American rights to practice free speech and press. So in response to his first claim that the U.S. government conducts surveillance through technology behind the backs of Americans, he claims that prominent telecommunication companies collect and supply data to the NSA by request for analysis, and that the Patriot Act allows for government to conduct collection of data with restriction. So first I would like to point out here that the source that I believe Ben used regarding telecommunication companies was titled Surveillance Programs. And this was from a website which is pro-Snowden and is, quote, dedicated to building support for Edward Snowden. And according to its own About Us section, is the only fund endorsed by Edward Snowden. Because of this fact, it's clearly a biased resource, and I consider it unreliable. Secondly here, the collection of data does occur, but it is quite restricted. And I did find a source which I think would better support his claim that the program responsible for the collecting of data is called PRISM. And according to a Washington Post article titled, "Here's Everything We Know About PRISM to Date," is that all the service companies that Ben mentioned, like Google, Facebook, Yahoo, etc., everybody denied providing, collecting information to provide to the NSA. Except for in very specific cases. And in these cases where it's when it's requested specifically for one person only, and it is required to go through lawyers. And a source cited by the New York Times, it says you can't say everyone in Pakistan who searched for X. It still has to be very person specific as far as the data that they're collecting. In response to his second claim that the NSA violates the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution by illegal spying, one of Benjamin's sources was titled "The Civil Liberties of Counterterrorism Policies." And in it, it pretty much states that the Fourth Amendment and Title III of the Omnibus Crime Control and Safe Streets Act of 1968, that the government cannot conduct searches without warrants. The Patriot Act, it is a little bit easier to get a warrant, but they still are required to obtain approval from a judge prior to searching anybody. And my claim here is that this source does not completely support his idea that the Fourth Amendment was violated in the surveillance allowed under the Patriot Act. And to support my claim here, in an article by factcheck.org titled "ACLU Add-on Sneak and Peek Searches Overblown," the Patriot Act includes a provision that allows the government to conduct searches and seizures without immediate notification, but federal authorities must still obtain a warrant from a judge under the same probable cause requirements as before. In response to his third claim that the NSA indirectly and directly infringes on American rights to practice free speech and press, Ben stated that Americans succumb to self-censorship due to fear of being surveilled by the U.S. government, and he talked about Edward Snowden being subjected to extradition. For starters here, the idea that the Americans are self-surveilling because of this was not supported by any of the sources that he provided. And then also the idea that Edward Snowden, he stated in his speech that the U.S. sees Snowden as a threat, and he simply uses his freedom of speech and press in his actions, when in fact it does appear that, according to sources, that he did violate the 1917 Espionage Act. According to a Washington Post article titled "U.S. Charges Snowden with Espionage," it states that Snowden was charged with theft, unauthorized communication of national defense information, willful communication of classified communications, intelligence information to an unauthorized person. The last two of those charges do fall under the Espionage Act, which, according to Cornell Law School's legal dictionary, is just related to gathering and transmitting classified information to anybody who it's not intended to be transmitted to. So in summary, Ben's claim that government surveillance infringes on civil liberties and privacy of American people He used unreliable resources, and the information that he did provide does not completely support his claims.
All right, well, I thought you did a nice job directly challenging the premise of the advocate's argument and demonstrating some good counterclaims on these particular positions, especially when it comes to what the requirements are to be able to get access to this information. You repeatedly talk about the necessity for warrants and that there are court procedures that people have to go through, that the claims about sneak and peek are overstated, that the Patriot Act issue, for instance, you still have to get a warrant on, and even the prison sort of thing. You've got some good data from the New York Times that suggests that only specific information is gathered, and there are very particular criteria that are set up for doing that. So I thought that you went right after the heart of the argument. There is a place where you kind of challenge the quality of the evidence because it's a pro-Snowden source, and I understand the idea here. I think one of the things you might want to say is that you're going to take the position that Snowden basically is guilty of espionage, and that the defense of him is either self-serving or likely to be biased because it's excusing his actions and behaviors there, and so therefore that's not something that we ought to be trusting, those sites. The fact that it's just pro-Snowden by itself doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad site, but you got to give us some reason why they would be biased in a particular way and how that bias is likely to influence them. I thought you were very good at identifying the claims as you went through them, and the thing that I thought finishes off your speech nicely is that you got a very solid summary. You just kind of remind us of what all your points mean and give us a good exit line for your argument so that you're leaving people the impression this is what this was all about, and that's exactly the kind of thing that works well at the end of a speech. Thank you.